Hey, everybody, welcome to SolarConnect and to this exciting next discussion. I'm Rebecca Taylor, Head of Marketing at Enerflo. Thank you so much again for joining. We've got Enerflo CEO and co-founder Pat Bennett, joined by panelists Nicole Rowe from IGS Energy and Joel Durrance from Green Tech Renewables. And we should have another panelist joining shortly as well. With that, I'll hand it over to Pat to get things started.
Okay, thanks, Rebecca, for that. And Jordan, what's up? Thanks for joining, man.
Hey, buddy. Sorry, it was like sending me codes and stuff to get in here. I'm
Oh,
like,
you're
what in the
great.
world?
You're great. We're all here now. So
Thank
we're
you.
just kicking things off. Let's do some quick intros. Maybe Joel, you go first. Maybe
Sure.
I think it's always fun for people to hear how long someone's been in solar in this industry. So maybe give a quick background to you, and then we'll jump to Nicole and then Jordan, and then we'll dive in.
Cool. Yeah, so I'm Joel Durrance. I run Green Tech Renewables in Orlando and Jacksonville. Entered the industry in 2018, which I guess kind of makes me an old head at this point in the solar industry. Came over from sports retail merchandising at Fanatics. And like the rest of you, I'm kind of one of those sick humans that has to be constantly stimulated. So this industry is exactly right for me.
Perfect. That's awesome. Nicole?
Awesome. I'm Nicole Rowe. I'm with IGS Energy. I run our business development team. I've been in the industry for about 18 years. Hard to believe, lots of ups and downs, but absolutely love it and being on this crazy solar coaster ride.
Awesome. Jordan, looks like you might be driving to a job right now. You just
I just left the office. I was trying. I had a meeting run about an hour later than normal, but it's funny because if we're talking about domestic content and panels and all these other things, that's been the bulk of a lot of my meetings lately. So,
There you go.
um, yeah.
How long you
But
been at
no,
this, Jordan?
like 2016, 2017, like right in as it was really coming to be a thing here in Florida. So I'm one of the original founders of Unicity Solar. We're here in Tampa and do work all over Florida, a little bit in Georgia and South Carolina, and then we launched California not too long ago as well. So yeah, that's us.
All right, awesome. Well, Joel, as we kick this off, you want to give us a little tax disclaimer for all the panelists here? Because we are talking about things that could be tax related.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll spare you guys doing this in between each question. We'll just knock it out early. But just to be clear, we're not tax attorneys here. And the best piece of advice is to always consult your tax attorney if there's any uncertainty around a lot of this, which, as we all know, there's quite a bit. But yeah, just to be clear, this is not tax advice. We're not tax attorneys. Happy to give opinions. We'll try to stay away from speculation as much as we can, but yes, to be clear, not tax advice.
All right, perfect. So I'm grateful that we have this panel today, and thanks all for joining. We're going to have the perspective of Joel from Green Tech, big distributor, Nicole from IGS, large TPO provider, and then Jordan, local installer in Florida. And I think all three perspectives are really important. Now, there's three terms that are going to keep coming up today, and I think it'd be good just to level set what these things mean, and we can keep it somewhat high level, Joel. But I think first, let's define FEOC, safe harbor, domestic content. So if you want to take a stab first at FEOC. And
Sure.
a year
Yeah.
ago, we probably never even heard that term or cared, but now we hear it a lot. So why should we care about that?
Yeah, a couple of reasons. First off, FEOC is foreign entities of concern, right? And like you mentioned, it is kind of a new term to us, but it's been around for a while. The Department of Defense has transacted under FEOC for a while. So, there is a plan to implement and execute this well once the ambiguity surrounding renewables is clarified a bit. Ultimately, the important piece here is that FEOC compliance is an integral piece of qualifying for the ITC. And Nicole, I'm sure can speak on that more from a strategic level, with the TPO providers. But ultimately, this is something that once we have clarity, we expect the implementation execution to be very swift, because this is something that's not new to the government, but it's new to our industry.
Okay, awesome. So that handles FEOC. Now we hear a lot about safe harboring and a bunch of people trying to safe harbor stuff by the end of the year. Why would they want to do that? What is safe harboring?
Yeah, so safe harboring, long story short, is the opportunity to procure material and commence construction in order to lock in the current tax code, right? So amount of the percentage in order to qualify for the 10% domestic content adder, also the system components in order to qualify for the 30% ITC. There are several things of note here. The only person that can claim safe harbor is the taxpayer asset owner at the end of the day. I think that there was some, has been some confusion, some misinformation around that. Then there's a threshold right at 1.5 megawatts. Anything 1.5 megawatts or less, you can utilize procurement of 5% of the total project cost, or physical work test. If it's over 1.5 meg, you'd have to utilize the physical work test in order to safe harbor under the current guidelines. Additionally, you can transact it within this year, right? So 2 safe harbor cycles left, end of this year, July 4th of next year. You can transact before those dates and then take receipt of receipt of material up to 3.5 months beyond that.
Okay, perfect. It's great on those two. Last one, domestic content. I think we've heard this one a little more, but just maybe the last term to define for everybody, and then we'll dive into why we should care about these things.
Sure. Yeah. So really the authority on this is the NREL table that shows us what is needed to qualify. It's now been broken down into, rooftop MLPE, rooftop string, ground mount. So there's several different ways to look at this. You want to make sure that when you're, checking compliance, obviously check with your TPO provider if we're talking about residential, but also know that each use case has slightly different expectations as far as which components get you to domestic content compliance.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for that baseline. Let's jump to Nicole. IGS I know has done a ton around safe harboring, trying to project volume for next year, trying to figure out who you want to work with. How has this all, kind of changed the way you guys do business and how you're looking at it?
Yeah, so this adds a different layer of complexity. So there was a couple different rounds that IGS did in regards to safe harbor, where we have some partners that we safe harbored with earlier this year that really helped lock them in between the 40 to 45%, depending on when the purchase was made. And then from there, we have a new purchase that we're going through and navigating right now, which is really around protecting us from FIOC, locking in that 45%, and really just giving those partners that long-term stability. So we're taking the approach with our partner network at IGS that you're either going to be safe harbored with us or until we get further clarity around FIOC, which is still up in the air on when that's going to be, that will be stopping those originations. So that way our partners are protected long term by our safe harbor equipment.
Okay, awesome. And I think other TPOs have had the same strategy. To your point, Joel, they're the ones that can claim the safe harboring. So it makes sense that they're the ones that should lock up a lot of the equipment. Now I'm curious, so we'll go to Joel and then Jordan. I assume, Joel, your teams have been very busy, getting a lot of phone calls. Let's think about the on the ground installer, how they're trying to navigate this. When you're receiving calls from them, trying to help them navigate how they should think about, ending this year and next year, what is advice that you would give kind of the local guy, of how he should navigate this?
Sure. Yeah. So I think the biggest thing, right now is making sure that all the jobs in your pipeline that are 25D centric are installed by the end of the year. Obviously, when it comes to domestic content, the conversation is again with your TPO provider to understand what their AVLs, what sort of changes we may see on their AVLs, right? We would expect relatively sizable contraction to the AVLs as FIOC compliance is paramount next year. Again, it's really one of those things where it's market by market and financier by financier. So look at one of the other big pieces is understanding the EPC payout structure from each lender and not looking at just your material cost stack as your overall profitability measure. So understanding how AC output is going to affect your EPC payout, but taking all things into account once you understand exactly what the requirements are from your existing TPO relationship. That's really the best way to navigate continuing to build relationships and really leaning in with your lenders so that you're getting updates on that stuff because it's going to change relatively rapidly. We're getting new information kind of on a daily basis now.
Yeah, your point about the ABLs, our finance panel that we just had the session before this, they were saying how ABLs will most likely be cut in half. We're going to start seeing that contraction that you were just mentioning. Jordan, love to get to you now. Local installer, you guys made the big shift to TPO a while ago. This isn't like something you're trying to change real late in the game here. But I'm just curious on all these subjects, how much do you actually care? Is the juice worth the squeeze of trying to source that domestic content for that little pricing advantage? Or, how have you guys been thinking about it?
Yeah, I mean, just to me, it's negligible, and a lot of it, it doesn't seem like sales reps care. It doesn't seem like homeowners are even asking the question or even know about it. And it's coming down to right now. Obviously, there's this huge issue of who can even be fiat compliant, let alone be domestic content. And then what's the pricing differences between all of this? So then just having conversations again earlier about anybody that's safe harboring. So now we don't have to worry about either of those two. And so looking at the differences again, like what he was just saying with the EPC payouts, that's kind of what we've been doing now is like I'm looking at, okay, well, what does this cost me and what does it pay out? And it seems, I mean, obviously, you know, these banks are not stupid. They know what the cost differences are for the most part. So it I think there's a little bit of an advantage to do domestic content, but if it comes with the headache of what we're dealing with right now, I think we're in a scenario where you kind of you got to figure out what you can get and safely get and know that you can sell. And that's kind of where I feel like we're at right now. I don't think it's going to last too long. I think this is a 3 or 4 month thing. But it's also a time right now where I'm looking at things differently. This industry changes so much that I think that's one of the main things is just being on your toes and ready to pivot. So, I'm primarily in phase. I mean, I don't really install anything else, but it's one of these times right now where I'm going to look at Solar Edge again and just kind of run some numbers and figure out a landing spot for a little while and watch to see what happens. And so I think a lot of people are in that mode right now, like kind of playing defense a little bit, on just protecting what you need to get. And I don't see, like, I'm not getting too many questions from people on like, hey, we really want domestic content or any of that. Their main thing is, hey, are we good? Do we have materials? And that's been the biggest bulk of the questions I've had.
Yeah, and that's the perspective I really wanted you to bring here today because we hear about TPO providers, others talking about how important this is, but I know there are installers kind of just running it of like, hey, if I can get my hands on this panel, I don't get that extra domestic content, it's okay, I can still make it work. And I think it sounds like it'd be wise, Jordan, for installers to have a kind of non-domestic content strategy in addition to maybe what they can get from their TPO provider just to diversify. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, I think so. And I think the other thing too is that most of these TPOs are providing the domestic content money at PTO. And so I think that the other issue, if you look at a cash flow perspective, is that installers, like for instance, if it's like, hey, we're going to pay this much more, but it's a holdback, or they'll pay it up front, but we've got to do it as an adder to the reps. Sales reps don't want to see an adder. So then we lose business. And then if we put it on the back end of the deal and the sales rep doesn't notice a difference in the EPC payout, well, now we're waiting longer to get the money and we're paying more for the material. So it's like we're losing that money as operating capital. And obviously it comes back and it trues up, but that can be a waiting game. And we're in a pretty good financial spot. We could do that if we need to. I don't think a lot of installers are, and so I think that's another big that I don't know forward to go domestic content and wait to get paid for it when it also costs more, that much more to get it. And so I think those are some of the things that are also probably going to cause an issue for a lot of companies. And even though we could do that, I don't particularly want to. So that's another nuance to the domestic content factor. If I can have something that's fiat compliant and I can just get paid and I don't have to worry about all this nonsense, the business is already complicated enough.
Yeah.
And so that's, I think, the reason why I think a lot of people, you know, the the banks obviously fare better with domestic content, and we want the banks to survive. We want them to be healthy. I think we're in a time where everybody's realizing that everyone needs to make money, which is a welcome change. But at the same time, we got to do on the installer side what helps us on the cash flow.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's awesome. It looks like we're having issues with Nicole. Hopefully she can make it back in. Joel, just on Jordan's comments, are you seeing that as well? That you're still, getting requests to source things that we know are non-DCA, and that's just a good way to diversify, how an installer might go about things next year.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was spot on, right? A lot of it comes down to the TPO pricing. Like in Florida, the way that the high share TPO providers have addressed the market has ultimately determined the mix of DCA versus non-DCA. The two largest providers in Florida, or two of the largest, kind of have completely opposite strategies within their pricing, right? So if you're with one, you're almost exclusively DCA, and with the other one, you're almost exclusively non-DCA.
Yep.
So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out over next year, and how, ultimately we know it's in their best interest once the supply chain kind of smooths out to incentivize more DCA deployment. So we'll see pricing changes. My speculation, we'll see some pricing changes that start to incrementally increase the amount of DCA deployment as more supply comes online, as we get through these safe harbor cycles that ultimately are really good opportunities for the module manufacturers. And to Jordan's point, we kind of need everybody to be healthy, right? So they're able to take advantage of these windows. And I think we'll see some smoothing of the waters on the supply chain side once these safe harbor cycles are behind us. But yeah, I agree with everything that Jordan said. And, ultimately it's the pricing from the TPO providers that are likely going to dictate whether or not you're focused on a DCA strategy or non-DCA. But to your point earlier, Pat, like diversification, I think is, a good way to spread some risk out right now.
Yeah, it's interesting. Again, back to the finance panel we just had, the financiers on the panel said installers should diversify their financing. So even they're saying like, hey guys, we get it. You might not need to go all in on me. Good to diversify and have multiple strategies. So yeah, I think that's something we should definitely be looking at. Nicole, back, welcome.
Yes, sorry,
Yeah.
internet issues all of a sudden.
Yeah, well, glad to have you. We've been catching up with Jordan about and kind of his perspective that sometimes the juice isn't really worth the squeeze on going through all the work to get domestic content pricing when you could just sell it for a little more and still get the sale and not worry about the payouts. That's kind of where we landed. Um, I did want to kind of ask the question back to Jordan. Obviously Florida, traditionally a red state, kind of a maybe some made in America vibes. But do you think that's coming into the sales pitch yet? Do you think, kind of saying like, hey, this stuff I'm giving you is made in America, you think that gives an edge, or is it not quite there yet, or do people care?
Yeah, I'll be honest, it doesn't seem to be as big of a thing as what you would think it is.
Hmm.
Obviously, you got to know your customer, and if that's an option you can do for them, then I think it's something you've got to have that, have that bullet in your chamber. But it's not. It doesn't seem to be a make or break kind of thing. Um, I mean, it's not to any degree that I'm getting that as a thing from reps, or any feedback at all on that. So, we talk about, if anybody asks, hey, the racking is made here in the United States. We use products that are, sourced from places where the United States has deemed to be not using child labor and forced labor and things like that. And so I think people understand, and you go into the like, hey, your phone has just as much stuff from overseas as these panels do, or these inverters
Sure,
do.
yeah.
So it's like, it's one of those things. I think people have kind of accepted that we're more of a global environment than we were 50 years ago, and it's okay. Um, so no, it just hasn't been a big thing. And with that said, my goal is to be domestic content. Like once the dust settles, and I would hope that it gets to where the TPOs will pay the domestic content kickback when we get funded for the job, because that's really the only reason I'm not even that, I don't really care about doing it right now. Cause I mean, like, again, you're waiting on the money anyways, and you're paying more upfront. So cash flow gets crunched doing it. I'm not really that incentivized to do it. So if it gets to that point where the payouts are happening in real time and it's at least a wash between doing domestic content or not, I'm absolutely going to do domestic content because I want to be able to say that. I want to use, products that are made here as much as possible. So, I mean, I don't think it's for, and I'm sure that's most installers would say that. If the cost was the same between payouts and materials, it all came out to being equal, they'd all want to do domestic content. But right now it doesn't balance.
Yeah, that's a great comment. So Nicole, curious on your side as TPO provider, how important is domestic content in your guys' pricing and payouts, and how do you view that going forward?
Yeah, so we like to incentivize our partners with a higher payout when it comes to domestic content. And we're a group that likes to pass a lot of those incentives over. Now, where we hear most of our EPCs that struggle with this is the reps can see that difference in pricing and
Mhm.
think that that's part of their higher commission and their higher payout on the job, when realistically, the EPC is the one that's having to go in and procure equipment at a higher cost. So I think it really needs to be a true balance between what works best for the EPC and then also educating the sales rep on here's the higher equipment cost, here's why you're not getting this added incentive fully going to you and lining your pocket as part of your commission. It's all part of that project cost and that just larger value that we're seeing there.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
that's good perspective.
And Nicole, I think that's, what you said there. The follow up on that is that these sales reps, Pat knows how I feel about sales reps. Yeah. They just, they, I don't know if it's a brain capacity thing or if it's just absolutely just not caring. But there's just the lack of caring to learn about these things or the ability to understand is just, I think that's what's so unique, is because if I'm Unicity and I'm over here against XYZ Solar, and Unicity, even though our payout is better, we have this 30-cent adder for domestic content. And this company over here, well, that's my red line and I don't have a panel adder. And it's like, hey, idiot, look at what you're getting paid. Like, they don't do that, And so that, it's such an interesting thing to me that we have this many dumb people in the business out there telling us how to run our businesses on top of that. But, it's, I think where it's at right now, it's like, if we had the ability to have the holdback put in place, but get paid that at funding, that's, I think, the difference, because a lot of installers are going to be getting pinched on cash when they're paying 30 cents or more difference for the material, but they don't get paid until PTO on that. Or if they get paid in real time, they're going to sacrifice sales, and everybody knows that. And, so I think that's the biggest issue, is it's an all or nothing thing. Either all TPOs are going to have to push everybody one direction and do it the same, or everyone's going to play these games. I mean, we go back to the days of Titan padding dealer fees and, like people, like companies doing that on loans and all of that. I mean, this is not something that's new. And unfortunately, it tends to be the bad actors that win in that situation. And I think that's another reason that the industry has had issues, is because the guys that are out there, these companies that are out there that can, you know, use these deceptive ways to make things look like they're better than they are, they're the ones getting the business from these sales reps that are just idiots. And it's just bad for everybody. Um, and obviously you're only with IGS, but this is something that goes beyond just one finance company or one TPO. It's like, it's odd to me that we can do a holdback to cover just our cost of material without the rep seeing that, but we don't get paid until PTO. It's just odd to me.
Yeah, I think there's some good points there. Nicole, you have any response to that?
Yeah, I think it's just across all TPO providers. This is something that we see a lot. And I think it's just a missing education piece that we all as industry leaders really need to get out there and really take the opportunity to explain to reps what more goes into achieving domestic content. It's at a higher price point. There's a lot of benefits for it. And I think them starting to really understand that can really go a long way. So they understand that, hey, it is costing my installer a certain amount more. And there are the benefits to get here. And I think that we need to do a better job sometimes of understanding the why behind it.
Yeah, I think one of the
Yeah.
things that we've seen on this too is people taking kind of an alternative strategy here as well, with the uncertainty around fiat compliance or domestic content, is wandering eyes toward a super compressed cost stack utilizing a potentially fiat risk module in the cash and loan space, right? So like there's a whole other segment of this I think that exists, and simplicity I think often wins. Is that a viable long-term solution? I think only time will tell, but right now that is something that has kind of surfaced over the last few weeks in contractor conversations.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, no, that's good discussion. Love the feedback. Sure many people listening are feeling the same things you're thinking, Jordan. So it's good feedback. I want to shift a little bit about to just inventory availability. And Joel, I'll direct this one at you. In the last couple sessions ago, some of the panelists were talking about how important it is for installers to be asset light, and letting that kind of give them the most ability to pivot as these rules change, as equipment gets gobbled up or whatever. Um, as you kind of think about potential squeezes or things or changes that could come, like in Q1, Q2, what is the advice to the local installer about how they should think about their inventory mix, and also potentially staying asset light instead of trying to safe harbor themselves or do some of these things on their own?
Yeah, that's a conversation that we're having on a daily basis, right? I mean, the ultimate idea is decrease the overhead as much as you can to kind of combat the cash flow issues that Jordan alluded to, right? The other piece, and this, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but it's really relationship based at the end of the day. I know that the way we allocate material, those that really have a deep relationship with us will forecast, will communicate at a high level as far as, we know that pivots are going to have to happen, and we know that at the contractor level, you're constantly pivoting and, being agile and having to come up with new strategies and executing quickly. So, we've got a pretty tight allocation model. I'd say, be skeptical of anybody that just says, "Hey, here's your module, go sell. We'll have it when you get done." I think that we're probably gonna see things shift toward more of a standardized, LOI contract type situation where it's like, "Hey, this is what you have. This is allocated for you. Here's the time period." The other interesting variable is kind of deployment strategies from the TPOs that have safe harbored at this point. We've had supply agreement discussions as well as far as, hey, Mr. TPO provider, we have this allocated for you guys in this market. But ultimately, from the distribution perspective, it's servicing our customers as best we can. And in that case, if we get good forecasts and we can get through it, we're obviously everybody understands that there's going to be fluctuations in forecasting, and communicating at a high level, both with your TPO provider about pricing, to Jordan's point about, hey, this would be great if, like, the recurring theme here seems to be this like ecosystem of synergy that's starting to build, which is really exciting. But everybody kind of being on the same page and understanding everybody has to be healthy in order to get to where we want to go to kind of get on the other side of this and have a path to sustainability and longevity.
That's great. So Jordan, on your side, how do you think about, inventorying yourself or using distributors? Also, to that point, do you change how you're selling to a customer to maybe just say, hey, you'll get a 400-watt panel, but not specify the manufacturer up front? And how do you navigate some of the inventory supply risk?
Yeah, it kind of depends on the TPO as well, because some of these things, they're fine with, not a non-customer facing change order versus customer facing, depending on the changes that have to be made. So that's something that we have to consider when we're looking at what materials that we're using and selling and when, especially right now as we get into the time of year where, our backlog, by Thanksgiving, we're going to be selling our January panels, like across the board, just to be safe. There'll still be a lot of those jobs that get done before January, but there'll be a lot that probably don't. So we don't want to risk it too much. So, that's actually why I was not home yet. I was trying to do this from my house in my office there, where it was a hell of more quiet. But I was actually in a meeting with CED, with Christian and them here in my office. Um, right before I got on this. And it's one of those things right now. It seems to be changing all the time, and there's still a lot of unanswered stuff out there. But I've got pretty well figured out for the beginning of the year, but it definitely seems to still be kind of touch and go. There's still going to be some things that might come online with these AVLs. Some people may get their compliance letters that are still being waited on, so there's still room for that to change. But I think, talking about like more formal, like LOI based allocation, I'm surprised it's never been to that point. I guess the demand's just always been good enough that no one cared to do that or needed to do that. But I mean, it wouldn't surprise me. I've even offered that, like, hey, if I need to do a formal LOI, to make sure we've got inventory and panels, like, I'm happy to do that just to make sure we're fine. But we're very good at forecasting and staying at the front of that and making sure that we're not under allocating or even over projecting either, because I think that's where a lot of times you see companies saying, "Oh yeah, we're gonna sell 500 jobs," and it's like, do you do 20 jobs a month?
Yeah.
So, um, I think it's just an interesting time where distributors are having to pay attention to, okay, what are these companies really doing? Okay, and having to kind of make some decisions that probably haven't had to be made maybe ever or in a very long time as far as what's actually available. But yeah, I think installers, like on our end, it is kind of odd right now because there's been you know, so much uncertainty on who's going to be fiat compliant, what's DC available and what's not, and all this stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. So Nicole, I think with the changing AVLs and other things, and I think as a TP provider, one thing you have to navigate is forecasting yourself and deciding how you're going to make changes, but also not hurt the installers and make them have to pivot a job they sold yesterday. AVL changes 2 weeks later. How do you kind of navigate that or get ahead of that or communicate it to the install base?
So what we tend to do is we over communicate with our partner network. We take it to the level where I'll get on calls with their distributor. I'll explain, here's our forecast, here are our goals together, and really align that way. And then also tell our partners that before you make any large purchases on modules, let's talk about it and make sure that we have that comfort level and there's not a potential change that we could see. So I prefer to have that over communication just so we're all on the same page together, because I think it's as important for me to talk to Jordan about his planning and forecasting as it would be for Joel on his end as the distributor that Jordan's working with. Right now, I think, as Joel said, it's all about partnerships more than anything right now. And I think that also ties into just the over communication on goals, strategy, forecasting. So you can just make sure you have alignment, because everything is so ever changing right now. It's just key to just all connect together.
No, that's awesome. Yeah, I love, there's definitely a theme of partnerships that's come up in other sessions we've had today as well. And I love, Jordan, your comment that, the industry woke up that, hey, we all need to be healthy and survive and work together. This has been a great discussion. I think we'll start wrapping here. Just want to maybe do a quick round based on what we talked about today. Anything you feel like we didn't hit on that you want to make sure we leave the session with today for those listening? Maybe start with Joel. Any last thoughts as we wrap it up?
Nothing specific, right? And I'll get back to the relationship piece, but I think one of the questions I get a lot of times is, hey, how do we get access to the safe harbor material from the TPO providers? And again, I think that is a conversation between the contractor and the TPO providers, but also involve your distributors as well, right? Like a lot of times, we're having active conversations with them regarding their safe harbor deployment strategies. It's one of those where I think the more cohesion and collaboration we can have, the better off everybody is at the end of the day. Like it's when times are, always relationships are important, but when times are really, really tough, they're even more important. And it's all part of kind of, getting to the other side of this and getting into a more sustainable workflow going forward.
That's great. Nicole, go to you, and then Jordan, you can have the last word here. So, Nicole, what do you think?
Yeah, similar to Joel, I think it's talk to your TPO providers. A lot are going to diversify between multiple, and I think it's really key to understand what's their strategy, how they're going to help you and your business long term, and really also understand what they feel about some of the risk and how they're mitigating risk right now as well, because there's still a lot that's unknown out there. So again, it's just over communicate, make sure you're understanding exactly what their plan is, how they're going to support you long term, because it's all about the partnerships right now. And it's really key to make sure that you have that safe harbor strategy with the TPO providers that you're working with.
That's great. Jordan, last thoughts for the fellow installer trying to just make a living in this industry?
Yeah, really struggling, and no, I think honestly, I mean, I think all three of us kind of mirror each other here. I mean, I have told quite a few other people, I'm like, listen, you got to understand where things are at now. I mean, the only tax credit that exists is commercial. So, you have to do business differently if you're not already doing that. The games are over, the funny business, all that stuff, like you can't do it anymore. And it's honestly, I don't dislike that part of it, because I think that needed to happen. However, that was supposed to happen. Obviously, it could have been differently. This is a shitty way for it to have to happen. But, I think that, now the TPOs are in a situation where they are looking at it as, hey, we've got to maintain these relationships. We're going to keep getting, making these jobs happen and having a business. But from the installer perspective, you got to think about it the same way. I mean, you've never been in a more of a crucial time where, like, you don't have that many options. You can't just go do bad business and then just hop over here to this other bank. I mean, that's not going to work very long, especially now with recheck and all of that. So I think it's more crucial than ever to pay attention to your business, pay attention to the kind of sales reps you have out there, what kind of sales you're actually letting happen, and what your stack is operationally, to make sure your jobs get done the correct way. Because if you could do all those things, then you're generally probably going to be at the top level of the installers for the TPO that you work with, and in turn, that's going to create a really good relationship. And it just, I definitely think now more than ever, it is a multiple layered thing now. You're not just some installer, you're not just some bank. It's not just some distributor. It's none of that anymore. And it's not, again, I don't think it's a bad thing. It's just, it's a different way people have to approach this now.
Yeah, no, awesome. I agree. A lot of the themes today have been getting back to the fundamentals and focusing on the things that really matter, not trying to get too creative out there. Just, focus on costs, reducing them, being asset light, forecasting as best as possible, getting your data in a good spot so that you can operate efficiently. And those that do are going to be fine. There's a lot of optimism. I felt like when I was at RE Plus, our morning session this morning that I hosted with Chris Collins of Ohm Analytics, a lot of optimism in the data there too. So again, I don't think, I think most people feel like next year will be pretty good, and it definitely will be great, I think, for the installers that are doing the fundamentals and doing the right thing and not trying to overextend themselves. And so, yeah, appreciate the insight today. Thank you, panelists, for joining. And Rebecca, sign us off here.
All right. Thank you. Many thanks to Pat, Nicole, Joel, Jordan for the great discussion. And thanks to all of our attendees as well. As a reminder, you can access the session recording in the event lobby, same one that you joined to join the live session. And you can also learn more at enerflo.com/SolarConnect. Thanks everyone so much. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks all.
You all.
Bye.
Appreciate it.